It's the spooky season time. You know, some people may think you look like a hellhound, but you look nothing but cute for me, so you don't really add to the spookiness of the moment. Welcome back, everyone, to Afrodo Reviews. On this channel, we decide, are those books worth reading over second breakfast? Or do they deserve the fiery pits of Mount Doom? And that's what we're here to decide. Now, the month of September has passed us. I read plenty of sci-fi works, and, for the most part, I enjoyed a fair amount of them. I didn't necessarily love them all, and I've also scarred myself with that. I probably should have saved that book for this month. But all joking aside, I really did enjoy last month's reading list. It gave me an excuse to read a bunch of stuff that I've been putting off for a little bit. Hey, but now we move on to the month of spookiness, the month of horror, the month where I get an excuse to read all my spooky books. And, for the most part, that's what I'm going to do. Now, this month was a bit of a choice to make. I look forward to October because it is my excuse to read all my thrillers and horror novels, as that's not necessarily what I'm most interested in when it comes to reading. Now, I do have an appreciation for them, but just not necessarily my main focus as a reader. So because of that, the spooky month is generally where I do all my spooky reading. And so, I pretty much had my TBR set for most of the year. However, I also found out that Reading This Life had a occult detective event during this October, and I really kind of wanted to do that. So, the TBR you're going to see is going to be kind of a mix of straight horror and thriller mixed with some occult detective works that I wanted to throw in. Again, like last month, I'm going to be reading a TBR that's slightly bigger than the amount of Mondays in this year. However, unlike the last TBR, I'm quite positive I'm going to be able to beat this one because all of these books are stuff I've been excited to read. So, yeah. So, without really further ado, and ignoring the constant clinch you hear down below where my dogs are fighting each other, not literally, but let's go on to the TBR of October. Now, no spooky month is complete without at least one Stephen King book. And I chose The Dead Zone very specifically because this is one of my mother's favorite movies. Voodoo, as much as your whine sound like the haunted, torturous screams of the afterlife, it's a little hard to record around. So The Dead Zone was one of the few here that I'm going to be going into with actually quite a fair knowledge of how this story is supposed to go. And so I'm not going to feel too bad about admitting that I've already started reading it a bit. But, so this one's going to be a bit weird because on the back, there is no actual synopsis to read out. It's just a picture of King's face. So, to give a quick synopsis for those of you who don't know what The Dead Zone is. The Dead Zone is about a man who is knocked into a coma and awakes like 20 to 30 years later, but with the inexplicable ability to see into the future of anyone he touches. Now, for the most part, the story kind of focuses on on trying to get his life back together after he wakes up from the coma, because it's been so long since he was awake that so much has changed and he needs to adapt. His true love has gone off and married someone else. What he knows about the world has so drastically changed, so on and so forth. However, this all sort of comes to a head when, after touching a man who is a presidential hopeful, John Smith realizes that he is kind of looking into the face of true evil, and he knows the drastic consequences of what's going to happen if this man is elected president. So he has to do everything in his power to prevent that. So, yeah, that's basically the synopsis as I remember it. It's been a couple years since I've watched the movie, and my memory is not that great, as I've stated before. But I need another book to add to the King's Corner, And I've been looking at this one for a while, so I figured, why not? Let's try The Dead Zone. I know it's not as straight horror as a lot of his other books are, but it's Stephen King, the master of horror. Any book counts. So that will be book number 1. Book number 2 is actually going to be a more straightforward zombie book. I don't really know what it's about, and shockingly, I haven't read very many zombie books. Apart from the one I referenced in Rotten Rune and Rotten Rune itself and its sequel, I can't actually recall off the top of my head a lot of the zombie books I've read. And so I decided that I wanted to try this and, see what it's like. See if it gives me a spooky time, or at least is an enjoyable read overall. So, without further ado, here's the quick plot synopsis on the back. Where can you go when the dead are everywhere? Cities have become overrun with the legions of the dead, all of them intent on destroying what's left of the living. Trapped inside a fortified skyscraper, a handful of survivors prepare to make their last stand against an unstoppable, undying enemy. With every hour, their chances diminish and their numbers dwindle, while the numbers of the dead can only rise, because sooner or later, everything dies. And when it comes back, ready to kill. And then it comes back ready to kill. I said and win. So this sounds like an interesting story. I don't know anything about it other than it has zombies. So I'll be going into this completely fresh. No idea. And from there, we'll jump into the first of my occult detective choices. And that will be something I've actually been kind of excited to read for a while. I saw it and I'm just like, oh, I have to. I've been staring at this for a couple months now. And I hope to God it holds up much better than How to Marry Keanu Reeves in 90 Days. Because I said the same thing about that, and it was so disappointing. I don't think I can handle it if this one is that disappointing. But that is Sherlock Holmes and the Adventure of the Sanguinary Court. Or, in a more simplified term, Sherlock Holmes versus Dracula. And I mean, what is there not to love about this? It's literally a book where two historical cultural icons, Sherlock Holmes and Dracula, the prototypical smart detective versus the prototypical vampire, and they go against each other. Not quite a crossover I ever would have imagined, but now one I gotta read just to be safe, because I gotta know what goes on in this, right? So, let's just go ahead and skip right into the synopsis, because, I mean, what else can I talk about it? If you don't get why this sounds like it'd be fun to read, you have no idea. So, a deserted ship beaches on a treacherous reef in an English harbor, its lifeless captain lashed to the wheel, its cargo 50 boxes of earth, and its only passenger a huge black dog which vanishes into the night. The mystery is clearly a case for the infallible Sherlock Holmes, but the unexplained disappearance of the ship's strange cargo, the discovery of puncture wounds on the dead captain's throat, and a rash of bizarre nocturnal crimes all point to a villain that unnerves even Holmes, Count Dracula himself. Based on a newly discovered Watson manuscript, Sherlock Holmes vs. Dracula chronicles the events leading up to the vampire's expulsion from England by Holmes, and the subsequent destruction by Professor Van Helsing. From the ghastly finish of the undead lady in white to the Count's chilling appearance in 2021B Baker Street, followed by a hair-raising chase across England, Holmes' adventures with this formidable foe is alive with action and suspense. And I'll stop there, because most of what's like, even that, the last bit right there, was kind of just spouting about the book. Stop it! Which is kind of spouting about the book, and it wasn't really necessarily talking about what's in the book as a story, but rather the book itself. But I do like this little bit right here near the end, typically where you see the about the author. They actually write about Watson as if he's the actual author, rather than Lauren D. Estelman, who is the editor of the manuscript he found. So yeah, this sounds like a really interesting story. It might have already kind of given away the ending in that little blurb near the end there, but you know what? I mean, what else are we going to expect? Dracula to kill Holmes? Yeah, probably not. So, that being said, the second occult detective book I'll be reading is actually something of a classic. Now, I'm going to apologize right now because from your perspective, you're just going to kind of be tossed into the deep end. And I'm more or less just reading this for myself, not necessarily my audience. That will be Death Masks, a Dresden Files books by Jim Butcher. Now, I have read all the Dresden Files books up to this point. I'm just going to leave that there because that looks fine. I have read pretty much all the Dresden Files books up to this point. I liked Stormfront quite a bit, but I found the mysteries in all the books very weak up until Summer Night. I liked Stormfront, but the mystery was so obvious that you could have solved it by chapter 3, simply because of the way these kind of stories are written. Then, book 2, Dresden only solves the mystery by chance. Literally, he has no clues, and by pure chance, he sees something that helps him solve it. And then book 3, I liked, in book 3, the mystery is only a mystery because it lies to us and says this one character absolutely cannot be it, but it actually is him. I have a sort of mixed history when it comes to this as a detective work, but that being said, he is still considered a private detective. And he consults with the police very often about crimes of a supernatural nature. And I will say this, starting from Stormfront, every book afterwards I have liked more and more. Even when it makes choices that are weird. Like, I won't lie, book 3 in the Dresden Files, I had to go back and check because it just out of nowhere introduces someone, and I'm like, wait, hold on, we're talking about this guy like he's been in all the other books, so what's the deal with this? This should be the next one if I got my order right, and I've been putting it off for too long. It's been about a year and a half since I've last read the Dresden Files, so I need to catch up. Here is the synopsis. Harry Dresden, Chicago's only practicing professional wizard, should be happy that business is pretty good for a change. But now he's getting more than he bargained for. A duel with the Red Count of Vampires champion, who must kill Harry to end the war between vampires and wizards. Professional hitmen using Harry for target practice. The missing shroud of Turin. A handless, headless corpse the Chicago police need identified. Not to mention the return of Harry's ex-girlfriend, Susan, who seems to be still struggling with her semi-vampiric nature, and seems to have a new man in her life. Some days it just doesn't pay to get out of bed, no matter how much you're charging for it. With that synopsis, I think I briefly heard parts of this book, but that's a funny story, because I used to do an inventory job when I had a job. I used to do an inventory job that required me to travel between cities to do. And so, we'd have one guy who would drive and he would control the radio. This one guy we used to drive with, he would put on audiobooks. And one of the audiobooks he put on was a Harry Dresden book. And I remember that during this time when we were listening to one of these audiobooks, it was a Dresden Files book, we started getting into a spicy scene. And I just stopped, looked around at the fact that everyone else in the van was asleep at this point, looked at him and said, you realize this is where everyone is going to wake up, right? And lo and behold, everyone wakes up, and the first reaction is, this guy is listening to smut on audiobook while everyone else is in the van. And it was just, it was embarrassing. I got so much secondhand embarrassment from that. I tried to warn him, but funny story aside, yeah, this will be my 4th read of the month. I'm going to decide to review it based whether or not I have anything to talk about. So, I probably will review it, to be fair, but I'll probably, if this goes well, I'll probably end up reviewing all the other books as well. But I've already read, Point is, this is the 4th book. And the 5th book of the month, not necessarily the final, if I have my way to say about it, but it is John Saul's The Presence. Now, I don't know too much about John Saul. I know a couple of fellow booktubers, more specifically the horror booktubers, really enjoy his work, so I figured he'd be a good list for the spooky month. But, notably, I don't necessarily know anything about his works. So, let's go ahead and read the synopsis. Beyond the sparkling Hawaiian beaches, masked by the deceptive beauty of the rainforest, evil awaits 16-year-old Michael Sundquist and his mother, Catherine, an anthropologist who has come to the island to study the unusual skeletal remains unearthed on the volcanic flanks of Haleakala. I have no idea how to say that. I apologize. Maui, yet far below the black depths of the Pacific, a mysterious substance snakes through undiscovered fissures in the ocean, as nature itself seems to portend the terror to come. And then, with the sudden, unexplained death of Michael's friend, a disturbing truth dawns. The corporation that is funding Catherine's dig has far greater investment than she ever imagined. An investment in medical terror, and her son may be part of their hideous plan. I'm not really sure what else to make of this. It's sort of... I'm not sure if it's going to go supernatural or it's going to go more, corporation, sci-fi kind of horror. I've read that John Saul does more thriller and suspense stories than necessarily horror, but I think that based on what I read there, this fits well enough into the category to fit into a spooky time month. I don't really have a lot of experience with John Saul, and I don't really have a lot of experience with his books. So, that's kind of saying the same thing. And I don't really have a lot of anything but secondhand knowledge, I guess is a better way of saying that. So I don't really have much to offer in terms of insights of what it's going to feel like going into this book. So, that being said, this will be the potentially last book of the month. And finally, this book I will read. It may not be this month, but it will be read. And that's because I decided when I did the book last year for it, I had to do this one. And that is the prequel to Star Wars Zombies. Star Wars Red Harvest. Now this book does what, a prequel normally does. It explains the origins of the zombie virus that exists canonically within the Star Wars universe. And it even goes so far into the past, we're talking Sith-controlled planets, before the rule of two was implemented. So what we're going to see here is not just regular zombies. We're going to see Sith zombies. That sounds pretty fun, doesn't it? I'm just going to read the back, and I'm going to leave that where it is. Unlike other young Jedi sidelined to the agricultural corps, those whose abilities have not proved up to snuff, Hesito Trace possesses one extraordinary force talent, a gift with plants. But suddenly her quiet existence among greenhouse and garden specimens is violently destroyed by the arrival of an emissary from Dark Scabarus, a Sith Lord with a fanatical dream poised to become a nightmarish reality. For the rare black orchid that Hestizo has nurtured and bonded with is the final ingredient in an ancient Sith formula, crucial to the Dark Lord's obsession, but with consequences far worse than simply fatal. Now, spawned by a heretofore unknown virus, the rotting, ravenous dead are rising, driven by bloodthirsty hunger for all living things, and commanded by a Sith Master who lusts for power and the ultimate prize, immortality, no matter the cost. I guess I was a little wrong about the setting of this book. When you read Death Troopers, it gives you a little synopsis into the book, and it shows two Sith apprentices fighting. So, I was actually somewhat shocked by that. I guess that's all I got to say about that. Sorry, I got a little distracted here. Apparently there's there's like a whole glossary in the back for something that's not even in this book. That's weird. Anyways, so yeah, maybe a little wrong about what this book entailed, but I do anticipate seeing at least one Sith zombie, and if I don't, I will be very upset and this book will get a 0 out of 10. That being said, just remember, with every book comes an adventure, and every adventure is worth having, even the bad ones. See you later, everyone. I hope these adventures will prove worth it.